question to the last the package
you were just introducing, and the last part you were talking about short texts, but it seemed to me that it was nevertheless a really huge study. So does this analysis or this R package, would it also cover short texts by, let's say, a sample of 100 participants instead of like 1,000? Because then the number of words obviously sums up with the results. Yeah. Okay,
that's a very good question. So the one of the advantages of this format, the method, is that it does well with relatively fewer instances than what you'd need in other sort of alternative approaches. So in the paper we show the asymptotics of the method, and so how you can actually get very good results even with a very small sample of instances, all the way from 5 to the thousands that you can get. By short texts, what I meant was just the response is short, not that the number of respondents was few. But yeah, it should work.
It's super cool. Thank you. Like I really think it's a wonderful program, wonderful model, because usually everything's like in the things I've done so far, everything's focused on the single word and not the embedding, and this is like the most important aspect when it comes to semantics. So thank you.
Thank you. Any feedback is much appreciated if you use it, if you end up using it.
Nikki, go for it.
Hey there. I just want to say thank you to everybody. This has been, even though I'm familiar with some of the projects already that have been presented, to have this kind of forum and this kind of conversation, I think is really thrilling. And it couldn't have happened, 5 years ago or more than 5 years ago. It just, it's nice to see this kind of juxtaposition of very different projects and very different perspectives. And thinking about the idea of having a background in mathematics or having had some statistics makes all of this easier to process. I would like to ask a question to those of us whose graduate training, whose professional training does not necessarily include advanced or even moderate mathematics and or statistics. So to the humanists on this panel, it would be really interesting, I think, to hear you both reflect on what it has been like for you to enter into this kind of technological dialogue and enter into this totally new set of methods. You both sort of, made allusions to the idea that you're kind of beginners, or you started out as beginners and now you're getting into the weeds, and it's a new thing, but also potentially a really exciting one. And I'm just interested to hear, do you feel that your own perspective has changed? Do you look back and see your own, do you see that you've made progress? Are you asking demonstrably different questions now than you might have at the beginning of your projects? That was kind of long-winded.
I think that for me, sorry, Mark, I don't mean to jump ahead of you, but I think that for me, the biggest shift has been moving towards a team versus being on my own, and really leaning into that, and that was a big learning curve for me. I mean, I was very fortunate to have Sarah and Ali sort of jump right in, but I would run these meetings and be like, I am not used to this. Like, I do not know. I'm in charge of like shepherding this forward instead of it being, on my own, like being that I was responsible for delegating tasks to other people and then interpolating that, and that was a way of working that I know in other disciplines happens all the time, but was so foreign to me as a humanist. And it felt at first like I really wasn't comfortable with it. And but in the end, once I leaned in and did it, it was like, oh yes, we can move more quickly. I thought that I needed to learn how to do everything I wanted to be in there learning how to work in R and in Python. And I still do want to know how to do it, but I also know that there are I bring something to the table and that they bring something to the table, and together we can have a great feast. But that me trying to do it on my own means that, we're eating Kraft macaroni and cheese 6 out of 7 nights a week. So yeah, so I think that for me, it was more just a working style and learning, I think also learning how to translate my humanist questions into a level of specificity that then Ali could take and say, okay, I hear what you're asking. This is what I can have the data do for you, or this is what I can do to the data to give you an answer. But I needed to like go 3 other levels that way.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with Rebecca, so I'll do it fairly quickly. The math itself, cosine similarity, I remember enough of that, from my undergraduate days that although I couldn't do it, I can understand the concept. But what I realized is people would keep asking me, well, what is it you want to know, right? And I needed more, just explain that more specifically. And I thought, I just did it. That I just did. And so it was less not understanding the math and not understanding the English that I actually found myself that, I think it's interesting, right? We use in computers, they use the word natural to describe, like English and French and those languages, which in literary studies, we think of as the epitome of unnatural, right? So even that word keeps throwing me off. And so I think that it's that level of specificity. And then the other side of it, and again, Rebecca said this, I think better than I will, so that it's trusting the team and knowing what one's able to understand and what one's able to trust. And that's an ongoing enterprise with the various teams that I'm engaging with.
So I'll just briefly add, because I know my presentation had a bit of math, but I'll just add the math will only take you so far. And if you don't have domain knowledge, you can produce a lot of bad work. And you'll always be able to find people that can implement and run a code and whatever not. Domain knowledge is much harder. And you can end up with really crazy results that don't make any sense and don't add anything if you don't have that domain knowledge. So I'll just to emphasize that that's even more important than just all the math discussion.
And Pedro, one of my questions for you was, what was your trajectory to this? Did you come at it through more of a math-based academic background, or?
Yes, so I did a political science PhD, but ended up, I was sort of lost in my third year, ended up taking classes in economics and cognitive science, and then in data science as well. And then ended up taking a class on text as data. And for me, it was, so I had more of a math background, but it wasn't really the math background. It was ultimately just realizing the possibilities of being able to transform text into data and treat it as data and study it as such. The possibilities that opened were just like, wow, it was mind blowing at the time for me. And so I just kept, digging into that. But again, you quickly realize the limitations of the methods if you don't understand the subject, right? So in all the examples that I gave, right, I was always saying, hey, that's strong, that's very consistent with our priors about how, these groups think, right? If you don't have that knowledge, you just follow blindly whatever the software outputs, then you can end up with very mistaken inferences.
Yeah.